Yeah. Good morning, guys. In today's session, we are going to understand what is Docker and why we need to go for Docker. Why we need to go for Docker, Docker installation, Docker architecture, and we will go for Docker setup. Okay. And we will discuss few Docker commands. Right. So if you are working as a developer, learning Docker is very, very important. Most of the people will think that Docker is a DevOps tool. Only DevOps engineers should learn the Docker. That's not true. DevOps engineers also should know the Docker, and developers also should know the Docker. Docker is very, very important as part of our application development. So first, let's understand what is a Docker and why we need to go for Docker. So Docker is a containerization software. Docker is a containerization software. Docker is used to simplify. Docker is used to simplify our application execution or application deployment. Docker is used to simplify application deployment. Using Docker, we can run our application in any platform. Using Docker, we can run our application in any platform. So could you please read what is the Docker? Docker is a containerization software. Docker is used to simplify our application deployment. Using Docker, we can run our application in any platform. Now, let us see here. I want to run my application. So in the company, multiple environments will be available. For example, this is dev environment. I want to run my application in the dev environment. In this mesh, I need to take one computer. In this computer, we need to install operating system. OS is mandatory to run our application. Operating system is required. After that, we need to install Java software. Okay, our application is Java based application. So we need to install Java software in that system. After Java, if any server is required, we need to install the server. It may be Tomcat server or maybe database server we have to install. Now, we need to install database server. Okay, database software we have to install. Now, these many softwares I have to install in a computer if I want to run my application. My application is a Java application. Assume that it is a Spring Boot application. So to run that application, I will take one computer. In that computer, operating system we have to install. Then we need to install Java software. Then if you want Tomcat server, that external Tomcat server that we need to install, then we need to install database software also. After installing all these softwares, then we can run our application in the computer. Okay, that is only for dev environment. Similarly, if I go for SIT environment, that means SIT environment, again we are going to take another computer. In that computer also, we need to install same softwares. Operating system is required. Okay, Java software is required, servers are required, and database software is also required. Again, once the SIT is completed, then I need to go for UAT environment. Again, I need to take another computer and I need to install all the required softwares to run the application. For example, in this computer, we installed Java 11 version and our application is developed by using Java 11. So here I installed Java 11 version to run my application. Now, this SIT environment is preparing by other DevOps engineer. By mistake, they installed Java 1.8 version. Our project is developed by using Java 11 version. In the dev environment, they installed 11 version. By mistake, in the sit environment, they installed Java 1.8 version. Now, what is the problem? The application will work or application will not work? Application will not work. This is called environment issue. This is called as environment issue. That means the application which is working in the dev environment, same application will not work in the SIT environment because of software version problem. Because of software versions problem. So this is very common scenario when we are running our application in the multiple environments. So we are going to write the code as a developer. Whatever the code we write, directly we will not deliver that code to the client. We need to test that code. Is it working as expected or not? We will test that code in the local. Then after, we are going to test that code in the dev environment. That means there will be one computer. In that computer, we need to install all the softwares and we need to run the application. When we are installing all the softwares, lot of version related issues will come. We need to take care of all the issues. If you install the correct version of the software, then only our application will execute. Otherwise, application will not execute. Now, dev environment is available. Then after developer testing is completed, we will go for SIT environment. In the SIT environment, again, we need to install all the required softwares with the proper versions. Then we need to run our application. Then here UAT environment is available. Again, we need to install all the required softwares to run the application. Then after, pilot environment will be available and production environment will be available. Pilot and production. What is the meaning of a pilot? Right. So working on the real-time data. Before going for the production, application will be deployed to pilot environment for the testing. Once the pilot testing is completed, then we will go for production. Production nothing but live environment. Production nothing but live environment. So these many environments will be available in the real time in order to test our application. Okay. Now, in all these environments, we need to install required softwares and we need to take care of versions of the softwares properly in order to execute our application. So, but here, what is the challenging thing, guys? What is the challenging thing? Version management is the challenging thing. To overcome all these problems, we are going to use a concept called Docker. If you go for a Docker, you no need to install any software. Docker will take care of all the softwares that are required to execute our application. I want to run my project in a computer. In that computer, operating system required, Java required, server required, database required. All the softwares Docker will download which are required for the application. We no need to download the softwares that are required to execute our application. If you tell to Docker, hey Docker, I want Java 11 version. I want MySQL 5.5 version. I want to Tomcat 9 version. I want Windows operating system. I want Linux operating system. So if you tell the information to the Docker, Docker is going to download and provide all the environment related stuff which are required to execute our application. What is Docker? Docker is a containerization software. Why we are going to use Docker? Docker is used to simplify our application deployment process. Docker is used to simplify our application deployment process. Using Docker, we can run our application in any platform. Okay, now here we are having 5 environments to run our application. If I don't use the Docker, then I need to take the computer. In that, I need to install all the softwares which are required for the project. Then I need to deploy the project. So in the dev environment, I have to install. In the sit environment, in the UAT, in the pilot, in the production. In every environment, I have to install the software. If I do some mistake in the software installation with the version number, application will not work. The application which is working in one computer will not work in the another computer. So here, getting environment related issues are very common in the real time. Getting environment issues are very common in the real time. So to overcome such kind of environmental issues, we are going to use Docker. Docker is a containerization software. Docker is used to simplify application deployment process. Using Docker, we can run our application in any platform. Using Docker, we can run our application in any platform. Now, how Docker is going to solve this problem? How Docker will solve this problem? Whatever the environment issue we are going to get, how Docker will solve this problem? For that, we need to understand a concept called Docker architecture. So now here, if you see here, we will write our code. We will write our code. Our application code will be available. So it will be a jar file or var file. Our project jar or var will be available. Now, once the code is available, to execute that code, what softwares are required? Which version of Java we need? Which version of database we need? That we need to specify in one file that is called Docker file. We are going to use one file that is called as Docker file. In that Docker file, we are going to specify where is our code, which version of Java required, which version of database is required, which version of which operating system is required. Everything we are going to specify in the Docker file. Okay, code will be available. We will write the code. We will package our code as a jar file or var file. Along with that code, we are going to create one Docker file in the project. That Docker file contains instructions to execute our application. What softwares are required to execute our application, we are going to specify in the Docker file. Now, by using this code and Docker file, we are going to create Docker image. What we are going to build, guys? We are going to create one Docker image. We are going to create one Docker image. What will be there in the Docker image? Docker image contains application code plus required softwares. Are you guys getting my point? Yes. Our code will be available. To execute that code, what softwares are required? Those softwares we are going to specify in the Docker file. By using this Docker file, we are going to build Docker image. We are going to build Docker image. What is a Docker image? Docker image contains application code plus application related softwares. Do I need to install the softwares? Docker will install the softwares. Docker will install the softwares. Once this Docker image is created, that Docker image we are going to store at Docker registry. How we are having GitHub to store the source code. Similarly, to store the Docker image, there is a concept called Docker Hub. There is a concept called Docker Hub is available. So how we are using GitHub to store the project source code. Similarly, we will use Docker Hub to store Docker images. That means if I create a Docker image, if I store in the Docker Hub, we can use it in the future. At any point of time, we can use that Docker image to run the application. Now, from the Docker Hub, we can take the Docker image and we can execute the Docker image. When you execute the Docker image, it is going to create Docker container. When you run the Docker image, Docker container will be created. So what is a Docker container? Inside the container, our application is going to execute, right? So Docker file, Docker image, Docker Hub, and Docker container. So wherever you want to run your application, you just need to take the Docker image from the Docker Hub and run the Docker image. when you run the Docker image, it is going to create Docker container. Inside the Docker container, our application will be executed. Okay. You just run the image. When you run the image, Docker container will be created. So this is called Docker architecture. Code will be available. As a developer, we are going to write the code. For that code execution, we know what softwares are required. We need a operating system. We need Java. We need MySQL database. We need Tomcat server, like that. Or we need Angular software. We need NPM Node.js to build our Angular application. So what softwares are required to run the application, that we are going to specify by using Docker file. Docker file contains instructions to execute our application. Code plus softwares will be packaged as a image. Inside the image, code will be available, softwares will be available. Once we build the Docker image, that Docker image we can store in the Docker Hub. Once we store the image in the Docker Hub, we can take the image from the Docker Hub and we can run the Docker image. When we run the Docker image, Docker container will be created. Inside the container, our application is going to execute. Now, when I want to execute my application in the multiple environments, do I need to install the softwares? I need to take the Docker image and execute the Docker image. You no need to install all the softwares in the computers. You just need to take the Docker image. In the Docker image, application code will be available and required softwares also will be available. You just need to download the Docker image from the Docker Hub and you can run your application in the any computer. Whether it is Windows computer or Linux computer, it doesn't matter. Whether you installed Java or not, whether you installed database or not, that doesn't matter. Because whatever is required to execute our application, everything will be taken care by Docker. How Docker will understand which softwares we need for the application? Docker file. We are going to specify in the Docker file. Now, when you want to work with the Docker, we need to understand Docker file. Okay. What is the Docker file? Why we need a Docker file? Docker file is used to provide instructions to the Docker regarding softwares required for the application. Which softwares we need to execute our application, we are going to specify in the Docker file. By using the Docker file, we are going to create Docker image. By using Docker file, we will create a Docker image. What will be there in the Docker image? What will be there in the Docker image? Docker image will contain application code plus application dependencies. Dependencies means not our Hibernate JUnit. Dependency means softwares that are required. Application code plus application dependencies we are going to package as a image. Once the Docker image got created, we are going to store the Docker image in the Docker Hub. Docker Hub is called as Docker registry. Guys, when you are keeping Spring Boot microservices in the resume, Docker questions are 100% in the interview. Because in the real time, every application we are going to execute as a Docker container. Every microservice will be executed in one Docker container. Why we are using Docker? Easily we can run the application in any computer without bothering about the required softwares. Because Docker will take care of all the softwares which are required to run our application. Can you tell me what is Docker? Why we need to go for Docker? Docker is a containerization software. Why we need to use the Docker? Docker is used to simplify our application deployment process. How Docker will simplify deployment process? Docker will take care of the required softwares. Docker will take care of required softwares. And by using this Docker, can I execute the application in any computer? Yes. Do I need to bother about software? which operating system, which version of Java, which version of database, which version of Tomcat. Do I need to bother about that? No, because application dependencies will be taken care by Docker. If you want to work with the Docker, what we need to understand? We need to understand Docker file. The next one, Docker image. Next one, Docker hub. And next one, Docker container. What is the next one, guys? Docker container. What is a Docker file? Docker file contains instructions. Docker file will contain instructions to execute, to create Docker image. If you want to create a Docker image, Docker file is mandatory. By using Docker file, we will give some instructions to the Docker software to create the image. What is a Docker image? Docker image is nothing but a package which contains code plus dependencies. What is the meaning of dependencies? Softwares, operating system, Java, server, database, anything, whichever the software is required to execute the application, those things will be, we are going to mention them in the Docker file. Docker will download those softwares, will keep those softwares in the Docker image. What is a Docker hub? What is a Docker hub? Docker hub is a registry where we can store our Docker images. So what is the difference between GitHub and Docker hub? GitHub is used to store the source code of the project. Docker hub is used to store the Docker images. Now, once we store our Docker image in the Docker hub, we can download the image from the Docker hub and we can run the Docker image. When you run the Docker image, Docker container will be created. What is a Docker container? Docker container nothing but one virtual machine. What is a Docker container? Docker container nothing but one virtual machine. In that machine, our application will execute. Now, I am having 1,000 computers. I want to test my application in the 1,000 computers. So what I need to do? I just need to download the Docker image and I need to run the Docker image. Do I need to install Java in 1,000 machines? Not required, because Docker I am using. Docker is a containerization software. Docker will take care of all the dependencies required for our application execution. Are you clear with my point? Yes. Look at the Docker architecture. Last Sunday, we conducted a workshop on the Docker. You attended? Yes, sir. No. The Docker Compose is a different concept. I will come to that point. Okay. Docker file will be available and Docker Compose will be available. So when you want to go for Docker Compose, so you have application and you have database. For application, we need one container. For database, we need another container. So instead of writing the two Docker files, we will go for a Docker Compose. When your application is, when you have multiple containers to execute at a time, then we will go for a Docker Compose. If you have only one application to execute, then you will go for Docker file. If you want to create multiple containers at a time, then you will go for a Docker Compose. For example, I want to develop a Spring Boot application with MySQL database. I don't want to install MySQL database. I want MySQL from the Docker and my Spring Boot application. For Spring Boot application, one container. For MySQL database, one container. Then you will go for a Docker Compose. Got it? Yeah, right. So when you go for microservices, so for example, in our application, 8 microservices are available. Instead of writing 8 Docker files, we will specify all the microservices in the one Docker Compose file. Okay. When you want to go for, when you want to create multiple containers easily, then you will go for a Docker Compose. Got my point? Yes, guys. Good. So now tell me, what is a Docker? Docker is a containerization software. What is a container? Container nothing but one box. Container nothing but a box. We can call it as a virtual machine. So that will contain everything which are required to execute our application. Docker is a containerization software. If you see the logo for the Docker, ship logo will be available. Okay, Docker logo is a ship logo. In that ship, there are boxes available. Those boxes are called as containers. Why they have given ship? No, ship they have given because Docker containers we can transfer easily from one machine to another machine. So these Docker containers are easily portable. Easily we can execute the Docker containers in any computer. So that is the reason they have given the containers in a ship. Easily they are transferable. If you have 1,000 computers, some people are using Windows operating system, some people are using Linux operating system, some people are using Mac operating system. So when you want to run your application by using Docker, Docker will prepare its own platform to run the application. Docker is platform independent. So the containers are available in the ship because easily we can transfer Docker containers from one machine to another machine. Easily we can create the containers to execute our application. Are you clear? Now, so if you want to Dockerize our application, first application code we have to develop and we need to write a Docker file. What is a Docker file? Docker file contains instructions to create the Docker image. What instructions will be available? Which dependencies are required? Where is the code? How to execute the code that we are going to specify in the Docker file. By using Docker file, we will build Docker image. Image nothing but a package which contains code plus dependencies. Image we can store in the Docker Hub. What is a Docker Hub? Docker Hub is a platform where we can store our Docker images. So here images we can make as a public or private. Public images means anybody can download our image and they can run our application. Private image means only we can download and we can execute our image. When you execute the Docker image, that is called running the image. When you run the Docker image, Docker container will be created. Inside the container, our application will be executed. Now, I am using Windows computer. My computer is available with the Windows operating system. Now, when you want to run your application by using Docker, so what we need to do is we need to install Docker engine, that is called Docker software. So once we install Docker engine, then we are going to pull image. Pull image. What is the meaning of pull the image? Where the image will be available? Where the image will be available? Image will be available in the Docker Hub. Image will be available in the Docker Hub. So we need to pull the image from the Docker Hub. Then we need to run the image. Pull the image and run the image. Once we run the image, then what will happen? In our Windows computer, one box will be created. That box is called as container. That box is called as container. Inside the container, application will execute. Do I need to install Java database and all? Not required. Why? Already they are part of the Docker image. So if you want to run your application by using Docker, you need to install Docker software in the computer and you need to download the Docker image and you need to run the Docker image. When you run the Docker image, Docker container will be created. Docker container will have our application. So application will be executed inside the container. Okay. Look at the Docker architecture, guys. Look at the architecture. And Docker not only for Java, Docker is for all platforms. We can Dockerize Python application. We can Dockerize .NET application, Angular application, React application, Java application, Node.js application. Any technology can be, any technology based project can be executed by using Docker. Docker supports all the platforms available in the market. Okay, nowadays, every developer is using Docker to execute their applications easily. To simplify application deployment process in the companies, people are using this Docker. In my project also, Docker is available. Every microservice will be executed as a Docker container. Got my point? Now, so if I want to deploy my project in the multiple platforms, what we do? We will download the Docker image and we will run the Docker image so that Docker container will be created. That means if our application is executed successfully in one computer, it can execute in any computer because we are not going to install any softwares. Softwares will be taken care by Docker. What softwares are required to execute our application? Those softwares will be taken care by Docker. Good. Fine. So Docker is a containerization software. It is used to simplify our application deployment process. Using Docker, we can run our application in any platform. So to work with the Docker, we will use Docker file. What is the Docker file? Docker file contains instructions to build Docker image. Docker file contains instructions to build Docker image. Using Docker file, we can create Docker image. Docker image contains application code plus required dependencies. Docker file contains instructions to build the Docker image. Using Docker file, we can create Docker image. Docker image contains application code plus required dependencies. Docker images we can store in the Docker Hub. Docker images we can store in Docker Hub. Docker Hub is called as Docker registry. Docker Hub is called as Docker registry. In real time, people will use AWS ECR to store Docker images. You can go for either Docker Hub or you can go for ECR. In the AWS, we have seen some services, right? Similarly, ECR is one service in the AWS, that is Elastic Container Registry. ECR stands for Elastic Container Registry, which is used to store Docker images. Docker Hub is a public platform. There we can store our Docker images. Image we can make it as a public or private. Public means anybody can download the image and they can run the application. Private image means only we can download and we can run that image. In the real time, we will use AWS ECR to store the Docker images. In our project, we are using ECR to store the Docker images. Okay, so ECR is used to store the Docker images. ECR stands for Elastic Container Registry. ECR stands for Elastic Container Registry. Perfect. Now, so once the Docker image is available, we can run the Docker image to execute our application. So Docker images are used to create Docker containers. Docker images are used to execute Docker containers. By using one Docker image, you can create multiple containers. Okay, I create a Docker image. All of you can download that image. All of you can run that image. So when you run the Docker image, one container will be created. If you run the image for 10 times, 10 containers will be created. If you run for 1,000 times, 1,000 containers will be created. Docker images are used to create Docker containers. Docker container will have our application. Our application will execute. Inside Docker container. Application will execute inside Docker container. Okay. Now, so here to run the Docker container, we need to install Docker engine in our computer. So we need to download the image and we need to run the image. So to run the image, to download the image, we need to install Docker software in our computer. Now I'm having Windows. In the Windows, we can install the Docker software and I can download the image and I can run the image. If you go for Linux computer, in the Linux computers also you can download the Docker and you can execute the Docker containers. Now, so to work with the Docker, we need to install, to work with the Docker, we need to install, to work with the Docker, we need to install Docker software. That is also called as Docker engine. Docker software is also called as Docker engine. Are you guys clear? What is the Docker and why we are going for Docker? So Docker is containerization platform. What is the meaning of containerization platform? What is the meaning of containerization platform? It is used to execute our applications easily in any machine. By using Docker, we can execute our application in any computer without bothering about the dependencies. What are the dependencies that are required? The dependencies will be taken care by Docker. Good. What is the Docker architecture, guys? What is the Docker architecture? So first we need to create a Docker file. What is the meaning of Docker file? What will be there in the Docker file? Docker file will contain instructions. Docker file will contain instructions. What is the meaning of instruction? Which dependencies are required? I want Python. I want Node.js. I want Angular. I want MySQL database. So what are the dependencies that are required for the application? We are going to specify in the Docker file. Docker file contains instructions to build Docker image. Using Docker file, we can create Docker image. Docker image contains application code plus required dependencies. Docker images we can store in the Docker hub, that is also called as Docker registry. In the real time, we will use AWS ECR to store Docker images. So Docker images we can store in the Docker hub or we can store in the ECR. What is the purpose of Docker images? Docker images are used to create Docker container. What is a container? Inside the container, our application is going to execute. Container nothing but virtualization. Container nothing but virtualization. So in one operating system, another operating system is going to execute. I'm using Windows. When I run the Docker image, Docker container will be created. Remember, Docker containers are Linux machines. Every Docker container is one Linux virtual machine. So whenever we run the Docker image, one Linux machine will be created in the runtime. How JVM will come in the runtime to execute our application? So we are running Java program. When you run a Java program, what is happening? JVM will come and application will execute in the JVM. Similarly, whenever we run the Docker image, Docker container will come. Docker container is a Linux machine. Docker container is a Linux machine. In that Linux machine, our application is going to execute. Are you clear? Good. So look at this architecture. Code will be available. Docker file will be available. File will contain the instructions. By using Docker file, we are going to create Docker image. Using the Docker image, we will create the Docker hub. Using file will create image will store in the hub. Once the image available in the hub, we will pull the image and we will run the image. When you run the image, container will be created. Container is nothing but a virtual machine. In that container, our application is going to execute. Are you guys clear? Good. Fine. Now, Docker setup. You can install Docker in the Windows machine as well as in the Linux machine also. I'm going to teach you Docker in the Linux, not in the Windows. Okay. Docker setup. You can create one Linux virtual machine. In that Linux machine, we can install the Docker. Let me go for AWS cloud. Let me take one Ubuntu Linux machine now. As of now, we have taken what? Amazon Linux. What is Ubuntu? It is Linux distribution. Okay, let me log in. No problem. You can use anything. Already we used Amazon Linux, right? Good. Now, EC2 dashboard. Go to instances. Go to instances. Already there are 2 instances available. We already know how to work with Amazon Linux. This time we will go with the new distribution. Go for launch instance. Now here I'm going to take instance. I'm giving the name as Docker VM. That means this is a machine. In that machine I'm going to install Docker software. Okay, let me go with the Ubuntu machine. T2 micro, free tire, key pair. I don't know which key I have. AWS key pair.pem is available. Okay. So let me select that AWS key pair. AWS key pair is available. Default VPC we are using. Security group, allow SSH traffic, 22 port number. Now click on launch instance. So I used Ubuntu distribution now. So if you go for Amazon Linux, username will be EC2 user. When you go for Ubuntu, username will be Ubuntu. Okay, that is the difference. Right. Now click on this instance. Click on the instance. Docker VM is getting created. Docker VM is getting created. You can see that instance state is pending. Public IP got generated. Now instance is running. Instance is running. So take the public IP, go to mobile extram, session, SSH, yes, remote host, that is the public IP, username. If you go to connect option, it will show you what is public IP, what is the username. What is the username? Ubuntu. So specify the username as Ubuntu. Okay. Then SSH settings available. Select the private key. Now go here. AWS key pair dot pem is available. Select that. Click on OK. Accept. Fine. So with this, I'm able to connect with the Ubuntu machine. Now clear. You can see the username. I logged in as which user? I logged in as a Ubuntu user. Commands are same. I want to check the files available. ls-l. I want to create a file. Touch command. I want to create a directory. mkdir. The only difference is package manager. For the Amazon Linux, which package we used? We used the yum package manager. For Ubuntu, apt package manager will be available. Okay. So in this machine, currently Docker is available or Docker is not available. So Docker is not available. Okay. What they are saying? Sudo apt install Docker. What is the meaning of sudo apt install Docker? Sudo nothing but super user permission. apt is a package manager. Online students, sorry, I got disconnected. Can you hear me now? Online people, can you hear me now? Yes, very good. Now, we created one virtual machine in the AWS cloud. Now we need to connect to that machine and we need to install Docker software. Go to session, SSH, username. The username is Ubuntu. Settings, go to the private key, then upload the PEM file. Okay, click on OK, accept. Fine guys. With this, I'm able to connect with my Linux machine. In this Linux machine, I created by using Ubuntu AMI. Okay. Now, in this machine, currently, Docker is not available. If you verify Docker version, Docker available or not available? Docker not available. Now I want to install the Docker in order to work with the Docker commands and all. Now, so to install the Docker, we need to execute some commands. I have given those commands in my Git repository, GitHub. In GitHub, there is a repository with a name called Documents. DevOps documents available. In that Jenkins Docker Kubernetes integration, I prepared it here. Set up Docker in our machine. Okay, guys. So these are the commands that we are going to use to set up Docker software in our Ubuntu machine. If you go for Amazon Linux, commands will be different. Okay, as I am using Ubuntu machine, so these are the commands we are going to use. Install Docker. So this is not required. Okay, so restart. This is also not required. Verify Docker installation. So which command we are using to install the Docker? Just this command we are using. Okay, now take this command and execute it. Take this command and execute it. Curl, then get docker.com. Now it is executing. You can use anything, that is also fine. Huh? No, here what I am doing is curl command is used to download the content from the internet. So here get docker.com. So I am downloading the script to install the Docker from the Docker website. So you see here internally it is executing all the sudo commands only. So it is a shell script. When I execute this command, it is downloading a shell script which contains a set of commands to install the Docker. Yes, right. Fine guys. So with this, Docker got installed. Okay, fine. Now let us verify sudo docker -version. Yeah, can you see when I execute a command docker -v, last time when I executed docker version command, it is saying that Docker not found. Now when I execute docker -v, what happened? The Docker version is coming. What is the meaning of that? Docker is installed successfully. We can verify Docker info. When I execute Docker info, it is saying permission denied. So it is saying permission denied. The reason is to work with the Docker, we need to use sudo docker info. When I use sudo docker info, what it is saying that Docker status it is displaying. That means Docker information is coming. So if you are getting the Docker information like this, that means Docker software is working successfully in our system. Are you guys clear with my point? Now, I want to run the Docker image. To run the Docker image, what is required, guys? To run the Docker image, what is required? To run the Docker image, Docker file is required. We need to create a Docker file. Based on the Docker file, we can create the image. Where the images will be available? Images will be available in the Docker registry. Once the image available in the registry, we can download the Docker image and we can run the Docker image. When you run the Docker image, what will happen? Docker container will be executed. Now, see the beauty of the Docker. Okay. In this machine, Java is available. Java is not available. Java is available or not available? Not available. Without having Java, can we run Java application? No. But now I have Docker. So by using Docker, can I run the Docker image? Yes. Let me go for dockerhub.com. Let me go for Docker Hub. Hub.docker. So this is Docker Hub. Okay. You need to create a account in the Docker Hub, guys. Now, I already have a account. Let me log in into my account. Yeah, I logged in into my Docker account. In my Docker account, you can see there are so many Docker images I have stored. Can you see? I have stored one Docker image 2 years ago. How many people downloaded my image? 66,000 people downloaded our Docker image. That means I created one Spring Boot application and I created Docker image for that application and I stored that Docker image in the Docker Hub. Now, when we want to run that Spring Boot application, you just need to download the Docker image and you need to run the Docker image. Here, there is another image, Spring Boot MySQL. This image is created by using Docker Compose. How many people downloaded? 3,000 people downloaded this image. So this image downloaded by 66,000 people. This is Spring Boot REST API. What is the image name? Ashok IT / Spring Boot REST API. Now, I want to download that image in my machine and I want to run that image. Already Docker file is created, image is created, image available in the Docker Hub. Now what I need to do to run that image? I need to pull the image and I need to run the image. See here how I am going to pull the image. To pull the image, we'll go for sudo docker pull image name Ashok ID / Spring Boot REST API. That is the name of the image. Docker pull image name. Execute. Yes, you can see Docker image is getting downloaded. Docker image is getting downloaded. Yes, Docker image got downloaded. What is the command I have used? I used sudo, right. I used sudo docker pull Ashok IT / Spring Boot REST API. Once the image got pulled, we can verify what are the images we have pulled. Docker images command, sudo docker images. Okay, Spring Boot REST API image is downloaded. When you execute sudo docker images command, it will show you which images are available in your machine. So in my machine, one image is available. I downloaded that image from the Docker Hub. That image is created 18 months ago. That image ID. Okay, this is the name of the image. Once the image is available, we can run the image. Okay, sudo docker images. By using this command, I'm able to see what are the images that are available in our machine. Now, once I got the image, now I need to run the image. How to run the image? Sudo docker run image name we need to use. Sudo docker run image name. Okay, guys. Now, if I execute this command, now you see what is going to happen. What is happening? Spring Boot application is getting executed. Do I have Java? Then how Spring Boot is executing here? Docker. Now, application is executing in our Ubuntu machine or application is executing in the Docker container? Application is executing in the Docker container. Observe, I have taken one Ubuntu machine, guys. So this is my Ubuntu machine. Ubuntu VM. Okay, Ubuntu VM. This is one Linux machine. In this Linux machine, I installed Docker and I executed Docker image. When you execute the Docker image, inside the Ubuntu machine, one more Linux machine will be created, that is called Docker container. So here container is available. Here container is available. So where the container is executing? Inside the another Linux machine. I have taken one Linux machine, that is the Ubuntu machine. In the Ubuntu machine, I installed Docker and I executed Docker image. When I execute the Docker image, Docker container is created. Docker container nothing but another Linux machine. Now here I want to access this application in the running in the container by using my Windows machine. Are you getting my point? I have a Windows machine. Now I want to access the application which is running in the Docker container. Okay, guys. Directly that is not possible. Directly you cannot access the application which is running in the Docker container. First, what we need to do is we need to establish the relation between the Docker container. We need to establish the relation between Docker container and this Ubuntu machine. Okay, so inside the Ubuntu, Docker container is running. We need to establish the link between Docker container and Ubuntu machine by using port mapping. The concept called port mapping. We need to map the port, container port to the Ubuntu machine port, then only we can access our application. Now, our application is running on which port number, guys? What is the port number? It is using 9090 port number. Now, I stopped it. When I stop, Docker container will be deleted. Virtual machine will be killed. Now, I want to run the container along with the port mapping. Okay, how to run the container along with the port mapping? Here, sudo docker run image name. Here I am going to specify -p 9090:9090. Okay, what is this -p 9090 port mapping? So Docker container is running on the port number 9090. In the Ubuntu, I want to map that port to the 9090 port. Now run it. Here, when I execute, again container will be created. Now I need to access this application by using 9090 port number. Okay. Now here, for that, go for our Linux machine. Go for Linux machine. Copy the IP address :9090. What is IP? 9090. Accessible or not accessible? Not accessible. We need to allow 9090 in the security group. So go to this machine. Go to this machine. Security group is available for the machine. Go to security. Security group available. Inbound rule. Go for custom TCP. Go for add the rule custom TCP. What is the port number? 9090. Save the rule. Okay. Now refresh. Now we are able to access our Spring Boot application. Okay. Here some hi or hello, some URL pattern will be available. Welcome. So when I give welcome, it is not responding. Yeah. So what it is saying now? So this is having welcome URL with the path parameter. So when I send the request now, you can hit the URL in your mobile also now. Can you hit that URL? The application will run. Application is running in the Docker 13.232.199:9090/welcome/your name. That is a path parameter. You can give any name. You can give any name. Online students, you can hit that URL directly. Coming guys, online people able to access? Yes. So that means we are able to run our application by using Docker. You see, logs are available, log messages are executing. Whenever you hit that URL, my log messages are printing. In my application, I implemented logging. Whenever you hit the URL, the logs are getting generated here. Console logs are generating. Okay. Now, this is the command I used to run that image. Run the Docker image. Okay. Run the Docker image by using sudo docker run -p. I am running that Docker image. Okay. Once the image got executed, enable 9090 port number in security group. Okay. Once it is done, access application using URL like below. Okay. So this here, if you observe, this is my public IP guys. You need to provide your EC2 public IP. Then you can access application which is available. Are you guys clear? Now, so this is very simple. We are installing the Docker software. Okay. Docker setup. So we have taken Ubuntu machine. In the Ubuntu machine, we install the Docker. Okay. Then we are pulling the Docker image already available in the Docker hub. We are checking what are the images available. We are running the Docker image. The Docker application is running on the port number 9090. We need to map that port in the host machine. We need to enable that port in the security group. Access application using URL like below. So with this, we are able to access our application. Okay. Now, the task for you today is, you understood this concept very easy. Just 5 minutes, install the Docker, pull my image and run my image. Docker application will be executed. After this, I want you to Dockerize one Spring Boot application. You need to develop one Spring Boot application. You need to create the Docker file. You need to create the Docker image. You need to run that Docker image. For that, in our channel already, one video is available. Spring Boot with Docker. Not that one. Okay. I prepared one small video how to Dockerize Spring Boot application. Okay. Very short and sweet video is available, guys. Spring Boot with Docker. Let me go for that. Okay. Yes, here deploy Spring Boot application in the Docker. 5 months back, I uploaded one video in the YouTube. So in this video, I explained what is the Docker, how to create the Docker file for the Spring Boot application, how to create the Docker image, how to run the Docker image. So that video is 18 minutes video is available. So if you watch that video, you will understand how to Dockerize Spring Boot application. That is the today task for you. You understand what is Docker, how to install the Docker architecture. Now you need to go through that video and you need to create one Spring Boot application and you need to write the Docker file for that, create the Docker image, run the Docker image. Then we can say you are good with Docker. Can you guys do that task? Yes, fine, good. I'm going to give this URL. Guys, beautiful content is available in our channel. Spring Boot with Docker. But the thing is, if we upload in the YouTube, people will not watch. Free of cost, na? People will not take it seriously. Huh? Like button. Okay. So, task assignment for you. Dockerize Spring Boot application. Dockerize Spring Boot application. Guys, all of you watch that video and complete Docker practice. Okay, good, fine. Thank you guys. With this, I'm stopping for today. We'll continue in the tomorrow session. Today, as usual, you have Angular class. Good. Thank you guys.